Hello and welcome to another video overview of the Simplement data director. In this video we're going to be focusing on the long text selection tool. So to start, let's just click on that and we'll go from there. Before I start filling out this field, actually I'm going to move the screen and we'll talk about what exactly the long text selector does and the STXL table in SAP and why this tool is necessary. STXL is a unique table in SAP where text strings, or a lot of people are familiar with the terminology, and notes, sometimes text notes, are stored as converted hexadecimal strings. And I'll switch to SSMS real quick and we can actually see what that looks like in reality. So I've opened up SSMS and I'm just doing a simple select star from STXL. And just again, like all the other videos, I'm in our demo system, so what you see is probably going to be quite different, but the main principles are going to be the same. And right here you see this column +D. This is that converted hexadecimal string I was just talking about. So these are now hexadecimals, but in reality they are representing, actual text strings, and these text strings can be almost anything you can imagine. They can be, long paragraph descriptions of workplace accidents. They can be any sort of text description. For our purposes, we're going to focus on one type, and those are text descriptions of purchase orders, because that's pretty standard across all SAP systems. Everyone has purchase orders, so we'll focus on that. And the reason we have a special tool for this is that this is not just any regular old hexadecimal string like you might see nowadays. This is a non-standard hexadecimal string, and it cannot be converted back into text through typical methods, so that's why there's a separate tool for it. Before we switch back to the data director tool, maybe just make a mental note of two columns in particular in this table that we care about. It's this TD object and TD ID columns. That's how we're going to focus down on exactly the text strings we want, which for our little demonstration right now is going to be purchasing order text strings. So coming back to the data director and the long text selection tool now, we're going to see why I said to sort of mark those two columns, TD object and TD ID, in your head, because that's what we're going to put in here into the long text selection tool in order to filter down the STXL table to exactly what we want, which for our purpose right now is purchase order text strings. So now that we've decided we need these purchase order text strings, we still have to figure out exactly what text object and text ID values to put into the fields here so that the tool can figure out what we're looking for. And there's a couple ways we can help ourselves figure that out if you didn't happen to know the exact values, which you're most likely not going to know ahead of time. In this case, I happen to know which values they are because I've used this a lot, but we'll go through the steps of how you can sort of guide yourself in the right direction. I'm going to make one assumption right now that we already know that the SAP purchasing tables are primarily EKKO and EKPO. If you don't even know that, I would suggest you refer to the Dictionary Explorer video where we go through how you can identify underlying SAP tables based on description. So if you only know that you want purchase orders, you can do a search in the Dictionary Explorer for purchase order, and eventually you'll find EKKO and EKPO. But I'm going to assume we already have that at this point. So with the knowledge that we're looking for EKKO and EKPO related text objects, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to SSMS, and we're going to query these two tables that the tool mentions here, TTXOB and TTXID, because those are going to let us know whether what we're looking for have valid text objects or not. So here we are in SSMS, and I'm doing a simple select star against that TTXOB table just to see if there are valid text objects for any of the purchasing tables for EKKO. And the answer is going to be yes for both of them. For EKKO, which is the header, and I'm going to use EKPO though actually because I already know that that has good data. Okay, so now we've proved that EKPO is a valid text object, but we need to be more specific than that because text objects can have multiple text IDs, which we'll see here in my second query, which is against that TTXID table. If I execute this select star where TD object equals EKPO, you can see here, at least in my demo system, there's 18 distinct text IDs for the same text object. So now that we've also confirmed that EKPO has these 18 text IDs, we now have enough information to go back to the long text selector tool and see if any of these IDs actually have text strings. Remember, this is just seeing if they're valid. This does not show whether any of these 18 IDs actually have data. For that, you can do sort of trial and error, or the fastest way would probably be to get in touch with one of your ABAP developers if you have access to someone like that, and they can often provide more exact detail about which one you want to use. For demonstration's sake, I've already tested some of these ahead of time, and I know that EKPO and the ID of F01 has some valid records in our demo system, so I'm going to use that, but feel free to put some or all of these entries in and see what comes up. They're all valid. That doesn't mean they actually have text entries in STXL though. Okay, so switching back to the long text selection field, we now have exactly enough information to fill this out. So the text object, we're going to do EKPO, and the ID, we'll do F01. And then what we can do is we can just hit, before we get to these other choices, let's just test this to see if there's actually records. In my demo system, it looks like there's about 10 or 12. In a real system, there could be hundreds or probably thousands of text records for purchase orders. So I'm going to expand this a little actually so we can see just how long these text descriptions that are stored in XTL can be sometime. Again, I'm looking at demo data. You might be seeing something totally different. But you can see some of these can go on and on and on. And these can be paragraph length text descriptions if they are to be printed on a standard piece of paper. But SAP will allow you to store that in STXL. I'm going to go ahead and close this for a second and go over some of the things I skimmed over a moment ago. First of all, we have the language filter. This, if you notice, this was probably auto-filled by default. On my screen it's E because I'm in an English environment, but this would autofill with whatever language your installation was configured in, which is something I've mentioned in other videos. Even though it's autofilled, you can change it if you want. So let's say that I want to see the German values. I happen to know that the SAP abbreviation for German is D. So I put D here, and if I just do text selection again, you'll see that I have less records, but I also have German descriptions instead. And you can do that for any language. You're not necessarily going to have a record. Like if I put, I believe I is the abbreviation for Italian, I'm probably going to get nothing. Yeah, because this is our demo system. You can even tick this include all languages box, and if you hit test selection, you'll see here it looks like I probably only have English and German in my system, but if you had 4 or 5 languages, they would all show up here. Just like some of the other portions of the tool, we have multiple SQL options for what kind of SQL you want to generate, whether you want just a simple select or you want it to create a sort of create view wrapper around it. The most important part though that I really want to focus on is this right here, this checkbox option to split text name into component columns. This is going to be critical for our ability to relate these text descriptions back to actual purchase orders. If I bring up the selection again, you notice I have 10 or 12 or however many rows, but I don't have any way to, right now as the data is presented, to relate this, join this back to an actual purchase order in the EKPO table. I don't have the key relationship presented to me here, and I need that. If any of you are familiar with purchase orders, you may already sort of sense where the solution lies, and it is in this TD name column. So that is the concatenated primary key of the table EKPO. Well, technically the client, the mandat, is part of the primary key, but if you look over here in the filters, we already filtered to a single client, so effectively we can ignore that. So we're left with, in EKPO at least, we're left with the purchase order document and the line item. So that's why we have this option here, because we need to split this TD name column into 2 separate columns, into a purchase order document column and a purchase order line item column. So I'll close this so we can check this checkbox and fill in the fields we need to. So first thing, there's a column alias, because what we're going to do is we're going to split that TD name column into however many new columns we need. In this case, we only need 2 new columns because the primary key of EKPO is 2 columns. So I already typed in the alias PO doc. You can type in whatever you want though, but you probably want it to have some meaning to what it's actually doing. Then you have to provide a character start and a character length for each new column you're creating out of TD name. And so how are we going to know the start and the length? Well, that depends, and there's a couple things you can do to help. If I switch to SSMS real quick, I have this little query from EKPO where I just do what is the max length of the purchase document number and what is the max length of the purchase document item number. We can see they're 10 and 5 respectively. So I know how long they each need to be. So now I come back here and I know that the PO doc needs to be a maximum of 10 long and the item number needs to be a maximum of 5 long. So I'm going to start PO doc at the first digit. I'm going to let it go to 10. And then you just click down here to create a second column. I'll call it PO line item. It'll start immediately afterwards at 11. And it'll go to 15. And if I test selection, I believe that will work just fine. So we see here now there's no longer that TD name column. Instead it's been split into PO doc and PO line item. And this looks perfect, so we now have the full primary key of the table EKPO. Actually, we're sort of skipping client, but that's okay because I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but the client is auto-filled here too. So we're already filtered to only one client, so effectively we don't have to consider the client as part of the primary key of EKPO. We only have to worry about the doc number and the line item, which we now have because we split them out. And to prove this, we can switch to SSMS real quick, and a simple query will show, let's just look for this first one, is there any PO docs with this number and that line item? So I just copy pasted those values over, and right here from this test selection thing, you can just Control-C, Control-V, copy that. So if I do a select star from BV EKPO, where the purchase doc number is that value and the line item is that value, we can see yes, there is one purchase order. And so now we've basically figured out how we can relate these text descriptions back to their purchase orders. So now we've proved the concept that we can transform that STXL hexadecimal that we saw earlier back into its true text string, and that we can also relate that text string to the proper record in the purchase order table. So now the last step that all you'd have to do is choose which type of SQL statement you want to generate, and then you can go ahead and create whatever view, stored procedure, or whatever SQL object you're trying to create that you need the text descriptions that are in STXL for a purchase order. And that's just our example. The STXL covers many areas like I mentioned earlier, but this covers the basic process of how you do that. So with that, we've pretty much covered the long text selector tool and gone from start to finish in the basic process of how you can find long texts that are in that strange hexadecimal format, how you can convert them back to true text, and then how you can relate that text to transactional SAP tables. And the long texts are used in many scenarios like I mentioned earlier, but the basic process is going to be very similar to what we just went through. Thank you for watching this overview video, and we'll see you on the next one.